Disney California Adventure. Weird park. Even 20 years later, no one has quite figured out its true purpose. Not even Disney. It bears the name of its home state, but has little to actually do with that outside of a few cursory references. No, Radiator Springs isn't in California, but Route 66 ends there. No, Monsters, Inc. wasn't technically made in Hollywood, but it was still a movie, and yeah, there ain't no excuse for this. For some reason, the park that should have a pretty clear identity and ethos barely does. Don't get me wrong, it's on par with the likes of any of Disney's castle parks around the world in terms of aesthetics. Looking around the park today, it's hard to imagine this place without its current structures and layout, and that's definitely by design. A good portion of this park has been changed over the years to make it appear as if this is what it was supposed to be. Like Buena Vista Street has always been here, Grizzly Airfield has always been here, Hollywoodland, well, that has always been here, but it wasn't always called Hollywoodland. Everything looks and feels every bit as awe-inspiring as Disneyland, but a lot of the themes don't seem to jive with the park's branding. How is a breakout mission by a bunch of Galaxy Guardians, or a sky school run by a bipedal dog man, or even a simple flight around the world remotely Californian? Well, as I said, it wasn't always like this. In its original form, this park was, according to experts, these two words. However, the themes were much more blatantly clear. I'm pretty sure no one saw this entrance and was like, North Dakota, hell yeah! It is pretty easy to look at how the park was in its first few years and see a clear line of inspiration from the Golden State to the areas and attractions in the park. California gets a lot of sun, people fly planes, bear, there are rivers and forests and beaches and bear, we have gaudy signage on our buildings, we make movies here, and bear. Even the idea behind its inception, as transparently capitalist as it was, did make sense in some capacity. Tourists who come to California tend to venture around California, so why not distill all of California in one park? I can think of a few reasons. Now, 10 years ago, my buddy and fellow park tuber Tony Goldmark discussed the history of this park up until that point, and while I'm going to cover a lot of the same ground, I'm more interested in the all-important questions. How much change is too much? Is it possible for a theme park to make significant improvements without sacrificing why they even exist in the first place? And why in a video about Universal Studios Hollywood am I talking about DCA? Wait, no it's not. Forget I said that. Now, California Adventure has been through a lot over the last 20 years, but getting anything resembling a second Disney theme park in California was nothing short of a miracle. Because Uncle Anti-Union Walt didn't have the ambitions of a man dying of desperation and throat cancer yet, he didn't have the foresight to purchase not only the land required for his massively risky theme park, but the land around it as well. And thus... yeah, Walt wasn't too happy that other people were making money off his dreams, so when the futurist bug finally bit him and he began to set his sights on the pseudo-fascist micronation of Epcot, he made sure to buy up as much land as possible.
Here in Florida, we have something special we never enjoyed at Disneyland, the blessing of size.
Fast forward to 1989 when the company opened their plagiarized version of Universal Studios on that land, then CEO Michael Eisner decided it was time to give California a similar resort-style treatment. Disneyland needed a second gate. But in what form? A counterpart to Epcot Center? Perhaps an overblown aquarium? Or maybe one that paid tribute to all of America? More like a combination of all three. Even though it seemed like there was a cohesive motif throughout the entire planning process, California Adventure was a Frankenpark. In a cabin in Colorado, in the shadows of the Rockies, a secret think tank assembled by Michael Eisner himself pieced this monstrosity together from the corpses of dead Imagineering ideas. Each piece with their own unique story to tell. Jack Rather had interesting business prospects. Before serving in the Marine Corps in World War II, he had inherited his father's oil company. Afterward, he became a television producer for classics like Lassie and The Lone Ranger, and later founding the Los Angeles public broadcast station KCET, as well as owning Corriganville. Briefly. I may have talked about that in a video. But he is probably best known for his contribution to Walt Disney's original Magic Kingdom, building the Disneyland Hotel. See, Walt wanted a luxurious hotel to complement the park, but he kinda ran out of money. Fortunately, Rather was more than willing to help his friend out of this bind, and the hotel was opened a little over a year after the park. But there was one minor snag. Disney didn't actually own the hotel. Even after several years of improvements and expansions, it was merely being leased. In the years following Walt's death, the company continually tried and failed to purchase the hotel. It wouldn't be until after Rather himself passed away in 1984, followed by his widow, actress Benita Granville, in 1988, that the Walt Disney Company would acquire the entirety of the Rather Corporation, which not only included the Disneyland Hotel, the film rights to The Lone Ranger, but the lease on the RMS Queen Mary.
What are we supposed to do with a boat?
Ship!
A lesson from which the company learned nothing.
Kathleen, we already have a duck!
Having sailed upon her multiple times, Jack and Benita fell in love with the elegant vessel, and as a result, signed a 66-year lease for her, along with an option on the surrounding 236 acres, just 1 year before he died. With it now in Disney's possession, Eisner jumped at the opportunity and tasked Imagineering to create a new Disney destination around the ship. The first proposal was dubbed Port Disney. This seaside resort would have included a marina, a cruise ship port, and an expanded specialty retail and entertainment district, in addition to 5 resort hotels. And at the center of it all was Disney's second proposal, Disney Sea, a 223-acre theme park that paid homage to the science, the stories, the myths, and the legends of the stuff that covers about 71% of our little space rock, doing so with 6 areas. The central icon, Oceania, would have housed an aquarium similar to the Living Seas at Epcot. Mysterious Island, inspired by the stories of Captain Nemo and the Nautilus, was all built around a magnificent man-made volcano. It featured several attractions, including a ride discovering the lost city of Atlantis, the Pirate Island, similar to Tom Sawyer's Island but bigger, and Nemo's Lava Cruiser, where suspended guests would careen through underground caverns in the volcano. Next was Venture Reefs, or Adventure Reefs, which was to be similar to Florida's Typhoon Lagoon water park. Guests would have the opportunity to swim or surf or snorkel through tropical reefs filled with fish, or simply enjoy the paradise-like setting. Even be lowered in a steel cage into a tank full of sharks if so inclined. Hard pass. Next, described by Disney as a harbor of fabled and fanciful ships, was to be the Fleets of Fantasy, where Chinese junks and Egyptian galleys would serve as facades for rides, restaurants, and other such attractions. In the Heroes Harbor area, guests would step into an ancient Greek village and experience attractions such as the Aqua Labyrinth, a challenge maze where the walls were made out of water, and attractions inspired by the voyages of Sinbad the Sailor and Homer's Odysseus. Finally, there was the This is kind of the only case where most of this was actually built. If you're familiar with the Tokyo Disneyland Resort, you've certainly heard about their second gate, Tokyo Disney Sea, which, hey, volcano, Sinbad, and incredibly unsettling entrances. I've been told it's an homage, but it doesn't make it any less creepy. The big question is, why wasn't it built in Long Beach when, by all accounts, all signs pointed to success? To put it simply,
not in my backyard.
Yeah, we're gonna run into this again later, but both projects were canceled in 1993, not only because of the opposition from residents and businesses worried about how Disney's presence would affect their city down the line, but the fact that they were kind of strapped for cash. Partially due to the failure of Euro Disneyland, but more so due to the developments happening in Anaheim to prepare for... Yeah, it barely worked the first time, so let's try it again, only smaller! And yes, this was the only park we'll be discussing that truly qualifies as a second gate, but Westcott wasn't the only thing happening. Not happening, you know what I mean. After the decades of Anaheim's along Harbor Boulevard, time had taken its toll and it was becoming all the more obvious. So Disney offered to make improvements to the surrounding infrastructure and a general beautification of the area, which totally wasn't a ploy to sway city officials into giving them the okay for what they really wanted to do. Yeah, that's basically how it happened. Because if a second gate was coming, the Anaheim property needed to be a full-blown Disney World-style resort. We're talking $3.1 billion worth of a new shopping and dining district, up to 3 massive multi-level parking structures, a 5,000-seat amphitheater, and a whole new theme park on top of that. And it was to be called Westcott Center, a West Coast complement to Epcot. You'd enter the park and immediately be stricken with paralyzing awe by the 300-foot-tall space station Earth. And it too would have housed an Omnimover type attraction called Cosmic Journeys. From there you'd explore the 7 wonders of Westcott. Toward the back of the park were the 3 pavilions of Future World. The Wonders of Earth would have you traverse various biomes such as the Arctic, deserts, and the rainforests, and likely would have included clones of Living with the Land, The Living Seas, I'm Noticing a Pattern, and an attraction based on Charles and Ray Ames' Powers of 10 film. The Wonders of Space was to be a revival of Epcot's shelved Space Pavilion idea, and the Wonders of Living was to be an amalgamation of the Wonders of Life Pavilion, including Cranium Command, Body Wars, and The Making of Me, and the Imagination Pavilion with a brand new version of Journey into Imagination, complete with Dreamfinder and Figment. Okay, I was upset that we didn't get this before, but knowing that I could have had Figment anytime I wanted! And then there were the 4 pavilions of World Showcase, which didn't focus on individual countries, but rather continental regions. Europe and Eurasia would be represented in the Old World. Along with some familiar sites from Epcot, the area would also introduce Greece as well as Russia, complete with a few of its attractions originally proposed for Epcot finally making their debut. Next would be a version of the Circle Vision show The Timekeeper, but the big e-ticket for the area was to be the Trans-European Express, a fast-paced James Bond-style chase which had riders zooming past iconic European structures. In the New World of the Americas, guests would see far more indigenous representation by way of an Inuit or Métis lodge to represent Canada, an Incan and Aztec show to represent South America, a traditional Mexican fiesta setting, and of course a big old clone of the American adventure at the center of it all, albeit an updated one. Moving on to Africa, most of these plans included elements of the never-built pavilion at Epcot, only with a heavier focus on African cultures through an exhibit on farm, an outdoor drumming circle show, and plans for an Egyptian palace expansion. Finally, there was Asia, which included architectural elements from China, Japan, and India. One attraction would have been a carousel of mythical Asian animals, while the main draw was to be a roller coaster called Ride the Dragon, taking design motifs from Chinese lion dragons. The area would have also seen the meant for Epcot version of Meet the World. Tying it all together was the River of Time boat ride, a tranquil journey through each pavilion with animatronic tableaus in between, such as the painting of the Sistine Chapel or Leonardo da Vinci painting the Mona Lisa, all lasting a whopping 45 minutes with a few stops in between. Also planned for World Showcase in either Africa or Asia was a new show called The 3 Great Religions of the World, an animatronic show about the creation of the world and touching on the history of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Who thought this was a good idea? Of course he did. But Westcot's biggest claim to fame would have been their in-park host. So why didn't this work? Epcot may not have been what Walt wanted, but it was still a comparable park to the Magic Kingdom. Well, pretty much the same reasons why Disney Sea was shelved. Though the city of Anaheim was on board, locals and local businesses were not. Part of Disney's improvements would have essentially forced those businesses along harbor to move. And the locals weren't exactly thrilled with the idea of having a 300-foot ball as part of their skyline. And even though Disney would scale it back into a simple golden spire, it was the combination of bad press and ever-increasing budgetary needs that led Eisner to cancel the whole thing, which may have been a blessing in disguise. because that did give them more time to focus on...
The idea was that a lot of kids in school don't know anything about history. They don't know anything about the founding fathers. This would be a entertaining way of educating in a place that has a lot of tourists.
Instead of using what's left of that Little Mermaid money to help fund and improve the educational system, we'll just build you a big old park that tells you a sanitized, corporate-approved version of the lie you've been told since you were a zygote, that America can and has done no wrong. Okay, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but Disney's America was to be the theme park equivalent of those warm and fuzzy feelings you can imagine you'd feel from watching Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, The American Adventure, and the Hall of Presidents if you were a seemingly disenfranchised boomer that accused Walter Elias Disney of being a socialist. I'd imagine. Not that I knew anyone like that. But the overblown Liberty Square was much more than that. For starters, it wasn't even in California originally. The plan was to build it near the town of Haymarket, Virginia, just a few miles west of the Manassas National Battlefield Park, as in an actual place where a very real war was fought. Yeah, can't imagine why the locals weren't on board with this idea, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. What was with this park, outside of its physical location, that had everyone up in arms? The park would have covered 120 to 185 acres comprised of 9 lands called territories, featuring the architecture of early American design. Crossroads USA acted as an entrance into as well as a hub for the park, complete with a couple of steam trains to take you on a grand circle tour. President Square would have housed the Hall of Presidents, either in the form of a clone or repurposed from the Magic Kingdom. We the People was a recreation of Ellis Island. Family Fun, set against the backdrop of a Midwestern cornfield, was the State Fair territory, where a literal field of dreams allowed guests to catch an exhibition game of baseball featuring the all-time greats. Afterward, they could ride on the Next, inspired by the Industrial Revolution, Enterprise was set in a fictional factory town with, I'd say, the most exciting e-ticket called Industrial Revolution. Okay. A roller coaster type ride, roller coaster revolution, I get it, through an active steel mill. The Civil War fort is where you'd find yourself coming back to throughout the day, not only to catch the Circle Vision show about a Civil War battle, but the live Civil War reenactment just outside the fort, and at night, a recreation of the battle between the Monitor and the Merrimack along Freedom Bay. The Native America territory would have you interact with tribes from the area in a quaint, respectable village, which is why the main draw to the area was a tribute to 2 white guys in the form of the Lewis and Clark. Last but not least was the park's homage to America's military might. Alright, I'll give him this. The park did look impressive. Even the idea of it acting as a primer to a family's trip to Washington, D.C. wasn't a bad one. Everyone working on this had their hearts in the right place. Their heads, however... This is not a Pollyanna view of America. We want to make you a Civil War soldier. We want to make you feel what it was like to be a slave. Or what it was like to escape through the Underground Railroad. Dang it, Bob, I thought you were one of the cool ones. And a year after the LA riots, too. Ugh. So with the public backlash and Eisner recovering from quadruple bypass heart surgery, likely brought on by the fact that he was also acting as the company's president due to Frank Wells' tragic passing, the company canceled their plans for Disney's America in Virginia, only to bring him right back for Buena Park, California. Yep, Disney was about ready to pull a Six Flags and purchase an existing park. The one they had in mind was none other than Knott's Berry Farm, mostly because it wasn't terribly far away from Disneyland, only about 8 miles west, but because of its historical value by way of the Calico Ghost Town. More importantly, their recreation of Independence Hall, to which they would have expanded the park's entrance to create President's Square. The Roaring Twenties area, now the Boardwalk, would have been remade into the Enterprise territory, with Camp Snoopy and Fiesta Village to be transformed as well, with only the Ghost Town and Indian Trails areas and Mystery Lodge show to remain intact. Again, this plan too fell through, this time from the children of Walter Knott declining the offer out of fear of what changes Disney would have made to the park, and the idea was finally put to rest in 1997. That same year, Knott's would be sold to Cedar Fair Entertainment, who ironically made more changes than Disney would have. So, corporations are art-hating monsters, who knew? So, what does any of that have to do with California Adventure? Well, you may have noticed I left out a few things, and that's because I didn't want to ruin the surprise. Let's go back to Disney Sea. Finally, there was the Boardwalk and Rainbow Pier, designed in tribute to Long Beach's Pike Amusement Park, complete with a Ferris wheel and wooden roller coaster. Now how about Westcott? Only with a heavier focus on African cultures through an exhibit on farming, a thrilling whitewater rapids ride along the fictional Congo-Bezi River, an outdoor drumming circle show. But Westcott's biggest claim to fame would have been their in-park hotels, allowing guests to essentially sleep in the park for the first time ever. And finally, Disney's America was a recreation of Ellis Island. Family Farm was exactly that, an exhibit on farming. A literal field of dreams allowed guests to catch an exhibition game of baseball featuring the all-time greats. Afterward, they could ride on the wooden roller coaster or the 60-foot-tall Ferris wheel, which is why the main draw to the area was a tribute to two white guys in the form of the Lewis and Clark River rafting ride. Last but not least was the park's homage to America's military might, Victory Field. Among the hangars were recreation of fighter planes from various eras of military aviation. One attraction would have been the first inverted dueling coaster themed to World War II dogfights, while the other was the biggest leap in technology by far, a brand new state-of-the-art flight simulator. Sound familiar? It's the very foundation of what became Disney's California Adventure, with the exception of the Hollywood Pictures backlot, which has an incredibly deep and fascinating origin story. It's Disney MGM Studios, but smaller. That's literally what all of my research points to. Eisner wanted a Hollywood land, he got it, the end. I'm also really tired and I have like 4 more of these to do, but hey, those are the dead Imagineering ideas brought to the park on opening day.
And we'll talk about opening day.
But the anniversary party is just beginning. Like I said, there are 4 more videos in the series coming, so make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you'll be notified when those videos are posted. As for when that is, ask around. Somebody will tell you the frequency of posting on this channel. It's not often. If you'd like to show your support monetarily and get early access to pretty much every video from here on out at various stages of completion, you may do so over on Patreon and become one of the many generous cool kids whose names you are seeing scroll by on screen right now, such as newcomer John Elliott. If you join with $10 or more, you'll be inducted into the Cool Cats Club and join the astoundingly generous ranks of Danielle Garcia, Dylan Van Voren, Gabby, newcomer Ian Cameron, Jerry Callahan, Mark Aquino, Mr. Amazing Dylan Cunningham, Pander Plays, and Tony Goldmark. Any amount will do, you can cancel anytime, and during these interesting times, I won't hold a grudge against you if you don't. Your viewership is more than enough in my book. Anyway, there are more fun things coming, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, Black Lives Matter, trans rights are human rights, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and bonus nachos, kids.